Perhaps I'll start by reading the epigraph of the book, because it's about this. So there are actually two epigraphs. The first is from Audre Lorde's Cancer Journals, which is a great book everyone should read. And the second one is a statistic from the Susan G. Komen organization, which I do not co-sign, but the facts are relevant. African American women now have about the same risk of getting breast cancer as white women. However, the risk of dying from breast cancer remains higher for African American women. In 2012, African American women had a 42% higher rate of breast cancer mortality or death than white women. So this is one of the themes of the book, where I talk about inequality in issues of healthcare, and this is one thing that, another thing that I noticed when I was going through this and I really wanted to talk about. So in the States, I don't know how much everyone has been sort of following this debate, but there's a lot of conversation going on now, because basically we've never had state health insurance, state-provided health insurance, and it's extremely expensive, prohibitively so. And because in the States, race and class very neatly coincide, and the more melanin you have, the less money you have. So that means that if you are sick, you're more likely to go to the doctor later because you can't afford it. It means that when you're looking at treatments, you'll go for the cheaper one. And that all adds up to a higher instance of death. And the reason why I said I do not co-sign the Susan G. Komen organization, it's extremely problematic if anyone has read about it, for many reasons, but one of the main reasons that I've never liked it, and this is another thing that I talk about in the book, is that there's an entire industry built around cancer philanthropy. And when you see especially ads for breast cancer foundations and things like this, they always have white women. They're always white people, and there's a very specific reason for that, because they're trying to get people to give them money, and they know that people will be more sympathetic to white people in the United States. And so that is sort of the sort of mediated reality that you see. But another very important thing for me to expose was that when you actually enter the space, and when you have someone in your family that's sick, and you're with them all the time, the reality is extremely different. And there are specific reasons for that. And that's something that I wanted to talk about.
I'll take 3 questions now. Who has the mic? There's someone right behind you there.
Hello.
Yes.
So my question would go to the rights of the abundance of scorpions. Mm-hmm. From the first statement she made, she said many of us are who we are because of where we come from, where we are born. It also affects our identity, what we are known as. So my question is, if we don't have some sort of identity, isn't it possible that we just wander around aimlessly, not being defined by anything? Shouldn't people who have gone before us be the ones who sort of direct our path, give us something to be identified with? If we want to reject it much later, that's fine. But shouldn't there be some foundation we can work on, build on?
Hi. So my question is for both authors, and it's on cultural issues around grief. Because obviously, I mean, I haven't read the 2 books. I'm looking forward to reading them. But you talked in your excerpt about going to a hospice to see your mother, or the protagonist talked about seeing her mother. And I'm just wondering, to what extent the conditions of death, in your view, determine your ability to grieve or not to be able to grieve, particularly when you're talking about finances being an issue, when you're busy worrying about bills, etc. And then for Mrs. El-Rufai, her book is slightly different in the sense that the death was sudden and was very unexpected. And I'm just wondering, culturally, we're kind of brought up to be scared of death. In most cultures. I mean, it's a cycle of life, and there are people who tell you the best thing you can do is accept it. But I'm just wondering to what extent the way we deal with death locally sort of fed into her narration, and how her character dealt with the grief of that death.
Good afternoon. My question goes to Mrs. El-Rufai. It happened that the setting of the book is African. So, as an African, we have some belief in certain the illusion. So, what really happened is that the question is, I read last week. I read a reason. Someone was saying the reason why Tinubu lost his son because of his aspiration to contest for presidency and what have you. He was mentioning many people. Now the question is, when you lost your daughter during the course of writing, and you stopped, when you started to write again, continue the writing, you lost your son. How has that influenced your writing? And perhaps, did you survive that certain illusion of Africans in share entirely? And if you do, then how were you able to cope with it? Thank you.
The first question was about identity. Oh, yes. And then the next one was about how we deal with grief.
Yes. The first question about identity, I'm not at all suggesting that people should not have identities. In fact, it's not possible. We all have identities. We all have identities based on where we are brought up, the kind of society we live in. We all have our identities. What I'm trying to say is, how shall I put it, the role of chance in identity. Everyone must have an identity. But I'm saying that sometimes the identity we have is just as a result of where we happen to be born. If we were born somewhere else, we would be completely different people. But I don't think there's anybody that would not have an identity. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Yes, cultural issues surrounding grief. Yes, that's a very interesting question, because in the book, when the protagonist lost her husband and child, as usual, because the protagonist comes from the same background as myself, a northern Muslim woman. So when she lost her family, of course, there were those that were telling her, this is God's will. And you must not cry. You should not cry. You know, crying is not good. When you cry, it's like you're adding more wahala on your dead ones. You shouldn't cry. You should just be strong. On the other hand, she had a friend that kept telling her, cry if you want to. Just cry. Tear your hair out. Just let it out. So sometimes when you are bereaved, you get confused. I've been through bereavement. And really, it's good in Africa when you are bereaved, you have a lot of people coming to sit with you, support you. It's all well and good, but honestly, at a point, you just want to say, let everybody go and just leave me alone. But there are cultural issues, and you are not free to say what you want to say. So you have to go through the motion with lots of people coming, and sometimes it's quite annoying because by the third day, fourth day, people come, they're sitting around, they're gisting, they're laughing, they're eating, they're drinking, and you know what is paining you, you know, so that's it. How grief has influenced me. Yes, as a writer, I don't know. I'd like to think that I've used it positively. You know, I have this attitude that, well, bad things happen to us. But it depends on what you make of it. Because the fact of the matter is you cannot change what has happened. Whatever I do, I cannot bring my daughter back, I cannot bring my son back. But from that experience, probably there's something I can take from it and make something positive out of it. So, and actually that's the whole idea behind my foundation that I set up, because I want to make that pain mean something. You know, I want to use it for something good. So, grief has influenced me so many ways. Thank you.
The question, Kadira's question to you about cultural grief.
So there's a section in the book where Thandi goes back to South Africa. So her family is South African, and they have a ritual there that we don't have in the States. About a year after a person dies, you unveil the tombstone, and they have basically like a second sort of funeral. And when Thandi goes there, she does this. She's around her entire family, and I think of that section as her being able to externalize in a certain way, in good ways and bad ways. And you know, a lot of it's through socializing and being around her family, and I think that's the one time where she's really, really not alone. And in my personal experience, I think Americans we're highly individualistic. We tend to be solitary. We deal with grief on our own. Also, you know, we say it's you don't want to acknowledge weakness and cry and all of these things. However, I think in my experience in South Africa, you're allowed a little more permission to grieve in public. And I think that allows an important outlet for Thandi. And then I think there was another question about how your financial situation can impact your grieving process. And I think your financial situation impacts everything. You know, I'm a socialist. That is how I see the world as organized. And of course, this is one of the places where it makes a big difference. Money equals time. And that means that you can do your grieving on your own, you can pay for a therapist, you can do all of these things. It makes it easier. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. The person that asked a question from that side, the person that mentioned about Tinubu's son dying, I don't know if I've answered your question completely, because I seem to think you're referring to maybe our African superstitious beliefs. Maybe he lost his son because he was running for governor, and maybe how I felt when I lost a daughter and then a son, right? Well, for me, it has never crossed my mind that anybody did anything to cause my daughter and son to die. I'm a very, very unsuperstitious person. I don't believe at all that anybody can kill my people by proxy. So that's why I just want to clarify that, because I remember you said something about that.
I wanted to ask, An Abundance of Scorpion, I mean, it's a very contemporary novel, and it's very relaxed about the issues of religion, also about how certain northern women live their lives. Tell us a little bit about why you wrote the women the way you did, because it's great. I'm saying, yeah.
Well, first of all, I've always felt that the literature that came out of Nigeria was always from the southern Nigerian perspective. And Northern Nigeria is a large place. I'd say we're 50% of the population. I don't know the real statistics, but roughly. And I think we have many stories that we need to tell, especially the Northern Muslim woman. There are lots of perceptions or misconceptions about the Northern Nigerian woman. I think we need to tell our stories. So that's why I wrote this. I hope with this I'll encourage other people, there are many young people here, to write. We need to write our stories. Of course, while writing this story, I want to educate people about the culture. That's why I put a lot of, like, the kind of
El-Rufai, how you write. Hello, my question is for Hadiza El-Rufai. An abundance of scorpion is an interesting. I'd like to know what's the inspiration between the title.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Sayadele. My question is for Zizi. One of the things, there's a dichotomy between like blackness in Africa and blackness in other parts of the world, and they go through the same problems as black women in other parts of the world. My question to you is, what, aside from like kind of the activism surrounding better health care for black people, particularly black women and cancer, are there other things that are being done? What other things, in what other ways are black women being helped? I mean, so that this kind of thing, even if it doesn't stop immediately, at least, I mean, there's a process that has been started beyond government health care, which seems dependent on race and class. Thank you.
Thank you. One question here.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Janet. I'm from Nairobi. My question is for Hadiza. I just want to take you back to what you said about Northern women needing to write more about their experiences. Is it possible that Northern women are already writing, but just not in English? And is there anything that can be done about that?
So, I've lost track. Okay, so you can start. Yes.
All right, the first question, Mola. Sex. Yeah. I think as writers, we have to be honest. So if your story requires you to write about sex, I think you go ahead and write it. But plug it in there because you just want it there. As a writer, I have 3 things I always consider when I'm writing: honesty, courage, and sensibility. You have to be honest. I like to I did not actually. But both scenes, they had reasons to be there. Yes. So